who decided that bagels should always play a central role in multiverse stories, but I like it. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainly Movies. Today, I'm going to be talking about the 2023 animated superhero film, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content, like reviews, rank lists, and trailer reactions. All my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all that extra content. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse stars the vocal talents of Shameik, Hailee Steinfeld, and Oscar Isaac, and was directed by Joaquim dos Santos, Kemp and Justin K. Thompson. It continues the story of teenage Spider-Man, Miles Morales, as he joins Gwen Stacy and a number of other Spider people on a mission to save the multiverse. Although we all like to lament the supposed decline of cinematic originality, creative original films do still exist and are out there in numbers that would probably surprise most people. They're just a little harder to find these days. The big megaplex-filling, box office-breaking movies do tend to fall into the oft-derided unoriginal categories. Remakes, reboots, sequels, franchises, movies based on books or existing IPs. Now, I recognize the surface-level irony of talking about this in a review for a superhero sequel featuring one of the most frequently put-to-screen comic book characters of all time. On paper, this film and its predecessor should be lumped in with all those other movies we use to complain about the state of cinema today. But they can't be, because even though they've got many of the hallmarks of the superhero sequel franchise blockbuster we're used to, they offer so much more that's completely original and completely unexpected. I'll admit that when Into the Spider-Verse came out, I wasn't particularly excited to see it. I had been watching the trailers and promos ahead of every movie I saw for months, and for whatever reason, it just wasn't enticing. But then it came out and the word of mouth was ridiculously positive, and yet I still resisted for a while, only giving in after I realized it was probably going to be getting an Oscar nomination, so I should watch it before it was out of theaters. It's not that I expected the movie to be bad, there was just no interest there, but I was very pleasantly surprised with it. It far exceeded my expectations, and even though I wasn't quite as enraptured by it as most people seemed to be, I still really enjoyed it. For this sequel, my expectations were certainly a little bit higher, so the pleasant surprise aspect wasn't part of the equation, but the rest of the scenario has repeated itself. I really enjoyed this movie, but not quite to the level that many other people seem to have. As with its predecessor, Across the Spider-Verse is a visual spectacle and an incredibly impressive animation feat. I was talking about originality at the beginning of this review, and much of this film's originality lies in its animation. With the exception of its predecessor, there's nothing that looks like this, or employs the techniques that this film does. Even when comparing it to Into the Spider-Verse, this still manages to be visually distinct. It still uses that comic book page brought to life style, and impressively mixes and matches animation styles and techniques within single shots, but it goes even further. Into the Spider-Verse featured multiple Spider-Man characters from different universes, each with their own animation style, converging in one universe with its own distinct but singular visual style. This film features even more Spider-Man characters, with even more different animation styles, traversing the Spider-Verse, and ending up in a number of different universes, each with their own unique animation style. Whether it be the 2D, 3D combo comic book style of Miles' universe, the mood-influenced watercolor oil pastel style of Gwen's, the DIY punk zine aesthetic of Hobie's, or anything in between. The seamless blending and mixing of animation styles here is utterly remarkable. Across the Spider-Verse is a continuation of Into the Spider-Verse, but it's also an expansion upon that story. Set 16 months after the events of that first film, Miles has had some time to become Spider-Man, and is definitely a bit more competent. But other things have been going on throughout the multiverse during that same time, which adds a bit more complexity to the story, with a more involved plot and way more characters. The first film was very much a Miles story. It was an origin story that focused on him becoming Spider-Man and having to step up and be a hero. There were a lot of other characters who helped him, but he was always the central focus. This film mixes the character focus up a bit. Miles is still a central character here, but his is no longer the only story we follow. In fact, I would argue that this film is as much a Miles story as it is a Gwen story, and I really liked that. I liked seeing the expansion and different points of view, and the development of their relationship, with both of them coming to the same situations with very different but parallel viewpoints. This is still a fun movie, but definitely a bit more somber than its predecessor. It's also a part 1, which seems to be a trend this year, so it ends with many of its broader storylines left unresolved, but it still remains satisfying as a whole. All Spider-Man stories have relatable themes and underlying messages to them. Spider-Man as a character is probably one of the most allegorical superheroes out there, so that's not really much of a surprise. Into the Spider-Verse was a thematically layered story too, but without having to spend a good chunk of its runtime on an origin story, Across the Spider-Verse was able to devote even more of its focus to its themes. It's fitting that this film got a June release, because one of the more prominent thematic threads running through this movie is fatherhood. Yes, there are some strong moments between Miles and his mother, too, but fathers take center stage here. Miles and his dad, Gwen and her dad, another father character that I'm not going to spoil for you. We get the kid perspective of it all, but the story also highlights a parent's concerns, too. Hoping that your kid finds where they belong in the world, and people who will love and support them as much as you do. Beyond Father's Day, June was also a good month for the themes at play regarding Spider-Man's identity, and the desire to, but fear of, coming out and telling those closest to them who they really are. Certainly an obvious allegory for another type of coming out. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse can be a bit of an overwhelming film, or at least an overstimulating one. The first movie bordered on that some too, but still managed to keep things tamped down a bit. But the Spider-Verse floodgates are open with this one. On one hand, it's kind of amazing to behold. Every frame of this movie is just loaded with things to look at. You could probably watch this movie a dozen times and see something new in just about every scene each time. This especially becomes the case when we finally start to see the extent of the multiverse and all the spider people. And animals, and usually inanimate objects. It becomes a continuous barrage of references and Easter eggs and connections to other movies. Characters and jokes and little definitions and anecdotes pop up on screen for maybe 2 seconds before they're gone. So, like I said, kind of amazing and probably a rewatch rewarding delight for Spidey superfans, but on the other hand, it is a bit much at times. Still fun and cool, but a little chaotic. And certainly for somebody who's not super well-versed in the Spider-Verse, the sheer number of plot-important characters that get thrown at the audience with minimal introduction could make things difficult to follow, leaving people feeling like they're missing out on key things by not having a pre-existing knowledge base that extends beyond the movie. But I suppose that's just a consequence of having an infinite multiverse. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. Pro number 1 is the animation. It's just masterful. I mean, I could probably gush about just the animation for an entire full-length video. The number of different techniques and animation styles used across the different universes and characters is mind-blowing. And then to see those different styles together on screen at the same time in a single shot, it's remarkable. You've got Da Vinci sketchbook paper characters in a watercolor universe, you've got punk zine cutout characters in a slick future universe, you've got Lego universes, living comic book universes, you've got a universe where the color palette and brightness of a scene depends on which character's point of view is being highlighted at a given moment, and what their mood is at that moment. And all of these contrasting visual elements somehow blend together to create an artistic and mesmerizing whole. The second pro has got to be the themes. The characters and plot certainly have a hand in this, but the emotion and themes are what really drive the story. Although it's still a fun and often chaotic film like its predecessor, this one has a more mature and somber atmosphere blanketing it. The decisions that the younger characters, like Miles and Gwen, have to make are more emotionally impactful than expected. And because the film expands its character focus some, we see additional thematic points of view this time around. Of course, we've still got Miles and his journey of self-discovery and heroism, but we also get a lot from a parent's point of view here. The movie has quite a bit of focus on fathers and their relationships with their kids. There's also commentary on themes as wide-ranging as coming out, and fate, and friendship. It's a movie that tackles a lot of things deeper than its plot, but that just makes it all the more impactful. On the con side, my only issues are really just minor nitpicks. It might sound like a silly thing to say about a multiverse story, but this movie feels a little too overloaded at times. There are so many things going on at all times here. The plot is expansive, the character focus jumps between a couple main characters, the animation is beyond beautiful, but ironically, almost distracting because of how amazing and absorbing it is. And then there are more characters and references and Easter eggs than you could ever spot in 30 watches of the movie. So it's just a lot, and maybe a little exclusionary to people who aren't already well versed in the Spider-Verse. There's also the frustration that comes from this being a part 1 of 2 film. We do get some semi-closure to a few of the story arcs, like Gwen and her father, but the movie really does just suddenly stop. I knew going in that this was a two-parter, so I was prepared for it, but apparently it's not common knowledge, because when the "to be continued" popped up on the screen at the end, my theater erupted in boos rather than clapping. So that leads me to believe that the ending probably could have been handled a little bit better. Before I give you my rating and recommendations, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse or any of the other films I mentioned today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you'd use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. I'm gonna give Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse 4 out of 5 paws. This is an animated marvel, in both senses of the word. It's a bit overstuffed and suffers some from being part 1 of a 2-part film, but the animation is mind-blowing, the story is engaging, and the themes are very emotionally resonant. I would recommend Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse to fans of Spider-Man or anyone who loves animation. The amount of Spider-Man everything is even more extensive and overwhelming than in the first film, so fans of the character will have a field day with the endless references and Easter eggs. And even if Spider-Man or comic books in general aren't really your thing, the animation alone is enough to amaze. Just like the first film, this movie expertly blends dozens of styles and animation types to create a breathtaking visual multiverse. If you liked Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, I would recommend Everything Everywhere All at Once. Not only is this a fun and at times chaotic multiverse story that explores the idea of alternate life paths, but it's also quite emotionally impactful, featuring a family-centric focus on the relationship between parents and their kids. Plus, there's another very important bagel in this story. If you liked the animation and want another good sci-fi tinged family story, you should check out The Mitchells vs. the Machines. It's another Lord and Miller produced story with some fantastically unique animation that centers on a father-daughter relationship in the midst of a robot apocalypse. And if you just want some more Spider-Man multiverse action, you might want to watch Spider-Man No Way Home. This MCU film takes a live-action approach to the Spider-Verse, and is especially enjoyable for people who are fans of all of the live-action versions of Spider-Man we've had in the past 20 years or so. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, what movie features your favorite animation? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information on this review, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe while you're at it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies. The way life should be.